is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Hong Kong's chief executive pledges reforms to spark economic growth. John Lee pivoting away from national security in his annual policy address. Partnerships in focus at the Shanghai Cooperation Summit in Islamabad, with China saying that it is ready to boost ties with Russia, and Pakistan calling for an expansion of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese leader Xi Jinping reaches out to the US, saying that his country is willing to be a partner and friend to benefit not just the two nations, but the entire world. US, Japan and South Korea unveil a new team to monitor North Korea's sanctions aimed at curbing Pyongyang's nuclear and missile programs. And North Korea, meantime, says more than 1 million young people applied to join the army this week amid heightened tensions with the South after an alleged drone incursion. Ahead on East Asia tonight, Malaysia, an emerging bright spot for Chinese international students who are drawn by its multicultural environment and the lower costs of education. But it is not just students who find it appealing. Hong Kong's chief executive, John Lee, has pledged to reform and revive the territory's economy in his third policy address. The latest blueprint aims to position the city as a global hub and improve people's livelihoods. That's in line with China's national priorities.
我哋必須抓緊機遇，自強不息。憑住香港我哋所有人嘅智慧同埋經驗，善拼敢贏嘅精神，必能夠愈強越強，再創高峰。我有信心喺我哋改革創新 共同努力下，社會嘅經濟會發展得更蓬勃，市民會生活得更豐盛，香港嘅未來一定會更美好。
And for more, CNA's May Wong, she joins us from Hong Kong. Well, good to have you in East Asia tonight, May. We heard that Mr. Lee, he's vowed all these reforms on the economy. What exactly is the impact on Hong Kong as well as its position as a financial hub?
Well, from wanting to set up an international commodities exchange with preferential tax regime to wanting to encourage more IPOs here in Hong Kong, he definitely showed that economy was the staple of his policy address. Ultimately, the whole aim, as you mentioned, is to make sure that Hong Kong remains an international financial hub, an international shipping as well as trading center as well. And all of these measures really largely are focused on trying to boost the economy. Remember here that Hong Kong saw a 3.2% growth last year, and this year they're hoping to achieve between 2.5% up to about 3.5%. And with all these measures, they're certainly hoping to be able to prop up the economy after the political tensions back in 2019 and also after COVID-19 pandemic. So all of these as well is to not just to boost the Hong Kong economy, but also to attract high caliber talents to this country and also to use Hong Kong as a base into the mainland China market and for mainland China to use Hong Kong into the rest of the world. So all of this, Hong Kong believes that they are able and positioned well enough to do all of that. As a financial hub, you know that competition is stiff among many countries. Singapore, for example, is seen as a financial hub in this particular region, and Hong Kong is close vying for that in terms of a competition. So it's pulling out all the stops to try and make sure that it remains attractive and it makes sure that it stays competitive going forward. But remember here that it's not just the economy he's focused on in terms of the foreign competitors coming into this country, but also for the Hong Kong citizens. He has actually laid out policies in terms of addressing the silver economy, in terms of addressing subsidized housing for the local citizens, and also making sure that he's building the healthcare as well as the education sector in this country. So it's rather holistic in his 3-hour speech, and at the end of the day, mixed reviews. But I spoke to one expert and he actually said that in fact it has really bolstered a little bit more confidence because the policy address does set a direction for Hong Kong.
I think it's boosted the confidence of an investor and business in Hong Kong to a certain extent. For example, set the right direction of where Hong Kong are, and the consistent approach of getting the right talent and the right cooperation in Hong Kong, building the eco-cycle for the innovation and technology, the cycle for green finance. But I would appreciate that some of the general public may not have a direct feel of the policy, because they might be not directly involved in those industry. But I would have to say that it would be just a deferral of the matter, because once those pillar industry has been growing, it would entail the other industry. For example, it would entail the retail, it would entail housing needs, it would entail professional service. So it's a matter of time, but I think as overall it would be benefiting the whole society.
Now, Mr. Li, he also tackled domestic issues with housing, livelihoods, also on the agenda. Now, you've spoken to some locals. How are they viewing this year's policy address?
Honestly, a lot of people were not paying attention, given the fact that the policy address was given in the morning on a work day. And so not many people were really listening into that some 3-hour-long speech. Ultimately, it's all about the results. They say it's a wait-and-see approach, where they will have to see exactly what comes out of it. You talked about housing. It's definitely a key issue on the top of minds of many of the Hong Kong citizens here, because Hong Kong has been facing consistently a housing crisis. Affordability has been an issue. People living in substandard conditions, in subdivided units. That means units that are so small, smaller than a shoebox, and you're squeezing in a lot of people in that one particular space. So John Lee has actually acknowledged the fact that he's hearing the people. He's trying to now improve the standards of that, but it obviously will take some time before that can be addressed. And remember also, very recently, an NGO, Oxfam, actually unveiled a report to say that the number of people in Hong Kong under the poverty rate has actually climbed. 20% of the population, or about 1.4 million people, are actually considered poor in this country, or rather in this city. And so these are some of the considerations that John Lee has in the top of his mind when he laid out the policies. But when I spoke to some of the people, well, again, mixed reviews on whether or not they believe that his policies will be able to bring benefit to Hong Kong, or they're actually not too optimistic about that.
I think this just depends on the mainland China's economy. Yeah, we are together. If the economy of the mainland China does not improve, then I think it's difficult for Hong Kong to have any actual improvement.
一半一半啦，因為人才外流咯，但係同時間又引入外邊嗰啲人才入嚟啦，咁即係恢復經濟係需要有頭腦噶嘛，有即係靈活嘅頭腦噶嘛，一半一半就係睇下嗰個可唔可以 replace 翻去咗外國移居外國嗰啲人才咯。
Opposition parties and critics slammed the speech for saying it didn't go far enough and that it's not going to solve the people's woes. But ultimately, next few days, a couple of weeks, we'll see whether or not the ministries, the departments are going to unveil more details to lay out the plans and also to flush out some of the benefits for the people.
Right, we'll be keeping an eye out on that for us as well. Thanks so very much. CNA's May Wong speaking to us live from Hong Kong. Pakistan's Prime Minister has called for the expansion of China's Belt and Road Initiative to enhance regional cooperation. Shahbaz Sharif was speaking on the second day of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, which gathers leaders from Central Asia, including China and Russia. Mr. Sharif further highlighted that a stable Afghanistan is essential to fully realizing trade opportunities. The delegations are also expected to discuss how to boost security and economic ties and touch on key issues around fighting terrorism. Well, ahead of the gathering, Chinese Premier Li Qiang met with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. And Mr. Li says that Beijing is ready to strengthen its strategic cooperation with Moscow. While Mr. Mishustin says that the two countries' energy partnership is comprehensive and has acquired a strategic character. For more, Hira Mustafa joins us live now from Islamabad. Now, Hira, the summit has issued a joint communique, I believe so. What does it say? And help us understand the significance for the bloc members.
Well, absolutely. It's a very happening day in the capital, Islamabad, and security measures are in place for the protection and safety of the foreign dignitaries and VIPs who are in the capital. As you already mentioned, that earlier in the day we saw Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif highlighting that cross-border terrorism should not be there, and he pointed out that Afghanistan, peaceful Afghanistan, is imperative for the entire region. However, in the joint communique, the SCO member states advocated respect for the rights of people and stated that they have the right to choose their political alignment democratically. Whatsoever it is, there shouldn't be any pressure on any of the state members, and there shouldn't be any interference in their political affairs of the country. SCO member states also reaffirmed that there should be peaceful settlements of all the conflicts for the peaceful coexistence in the region. They also agreed upon that unilateral application of sanctions is incompatible with principles of international law, and it has negative effects on the third world countries who are still on the way to the progress. As we do know, recently the US has sanctioned two of the Chinese firms, citing they were aiding to Pakistan's ballistic missile program. And this is not the first time that the sanctions were being implemented on the Chinese firms. We have seen this development in October 2023. Also, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, in his concluding remarks, highlighted the conflict in Gaza and the Middle Eastern crisis. He said that there should be a two-state solution, and there should be unconditional ceasefire in the state of Gaza at the moment.
Hira, what's also interesting to note is that the Indian foreign minister made a rare appearance in Pakistan for the summit. I'm wondering, how did that play out?
Yes, absolutely. That this is the first time that any Indian diplomat is in Pakistan since 2015. So all eyes were set on the statement of Indian Foreign Minister. However, I would like to mention here that only Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was aired, and rest of the dignitaries' speech was not aired. However, we do know that Indian Foreign Minister has stated, and he talked about the cross-border terrorism. He also said that there should be respect to sovereignty and territorial integrity, reminding the SCO member states of combating terrorism, extremism and separatism. As India blames Pakistan and China of coming together and violating its sovereignty under China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which both China and Pakistan denies. Jaishankar spoke within the ambit of SCO. And before arriving to Pakistan, he clearly stated that India is not interested in having any bilateral talk with Islamabad, and he is only here in Islamabad representing Indian side. And also, Islamabad hasn't made any comment on the disputed region of Kashmir between the two countries.
All right, thanks for highlighting those points. Hira Mustafa reporting to us live from Islamabad. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, China property stocks rally on speculation of new government measures to boost the ailing housing sector. And move over, Google. Alibaba International says its new AI translation tool is better than those in the market. Hello again. You are watching East Asia Tonight right here on CNA, and it is time for Business News with Roland Lim. And I believe some big moves in the markets today.
That's right, Telly. It's a roller coaster ride for the Greater China markets. Chinese developer stocks rallied on speculation the government and the central bank will announce new measures to boost the housing sector tomorrow. The Shanghai Composite Index barely holding on to gains by the end of the trading session, while the tech-laden Shenzhen component, well, it lost more than 1%. The blue chip CSI 300 lower by 0.6%. Hong Kong's broader Hang Seng Index rose earlier in the afternoon, only to succumb to profit-taking. Chief Executive John Lee of Hong Kong announced plans to raise the borrowing limit of homes in his policy address. The CSI Real Estate Index more than 5% at the close, and the Hang Seng Mainland's Properties Index, which consists of Chinese developers, well, that climbed as much as 4.2% before ending the day 3.4% in the green. Let's focus in on those Chinese developer stocks in Hong Kong. Troubled developer Banker got the biggest boost, rallying nearly 19% today. Well, that's not on the screen, but Longfor Group leading the percentage gainers at 7.8%. And the second biggest developer in China, that's Longfor Group. China Overseas Land climbing 3.76%. Hong Kong's IPO market experiencing a surge in activity. Now, Chinese autonomous driving firm Horizon Robotics is the latest to tap the market, aiming to raise up to $696 million. The company is one of 16 that have applied to list on the mainland board of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, driven by Beijing's stimulus measures and improved investor sentiments. Horizon Robotics, which is dubbed China's challenger to NVIDIA, will be selling 1.36 billion shares at about 50 US cents apiece. The company is expected to start trading next Thursday. The deal follows Chinese home appliance maker Midea Group's $4.6 billion offering, and that propelled Hong Kong back to the top 5 of the global IPO league table. This week, bottled water company, that's China Resources Beverage, is also taking investor orders to raise as much as $649 million in its Hong Kong IPO. Even with the pickup in the city's IPO market, analysts urge caution as volatility remains. Now, before Horizon Robotics and China Resources Beverage, Hong Kong's IPO volumes had fallen to multi-year lows, as Chinese regulators hold back approvals from mainland companies looking to raise capital offshore. South Korea will provide financial support worth some $6.5 billion for its semiconductor industry by next year. The finance ministry says this is to help local chip makers take the lead in the competitive global market. Now, the aid is part of the $19 billion comprehensive support package announced by President Yoon Suk-yeol back in June. Under the plan, the government will provide $3.5 billion through low-interest loans for chip makers and funding programs to boost the overall industry ecosystem. Another $1.2 billion will be set aside to conduct massive research and development projects and to nurture talent. Some $1.8 billion will go to infrastructure construction for the world's biggest semiconductor cluster in the city of Yong'in. That's where Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, and other chip makers plan to build 60 new fabrication plants. Now, new laws to protect the semicon industry also in the works, with a focus on protecting startups from technology theft. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba's international arm has launched an update on its AI-powered translation tool that the firm says is better than similar products from key competitors, including Google, DeepL, and ChatGPT. That's according to an assessment using translation benchmark framework Flores. The results show that Alibaba's AI model called Marco MT achieved higher scores compared to its global peers. This latest version is based only on large language models, which enables it to draw on contextual clues to produce more accurate translations. Alibaba International launched its AI toolkit about a year ago and has about 500,000 merchant users. This improved translation tool will enable sellers to create more precise product pages in the languages of their target market. Alibaba's international unit says the new offerings will strengthen its cross-border e-commerce platforms such as AliExpress and Lazada. South Korea added more than 100,000 jobs in September, marking a third consecutive month of growth. But the figure remains relatively weak compared to the 300,000 additions seen in the first 2 months of the year. September's job growth was largely driven by additional positions for older adults. Although jobs for those in their 20s and 40s saw a decline, the statistics agency attributed the fall to a dip in total population in those age groups. Now, sector-wise, construction jobs saw its largest on-year drop ever. This is the fifth consecutive month of decline. The sector has been performing poorly amid unfavorable weather conditions and a high interest rate environment. Wholesale and retail sectors also recorded its sharpest fall since November of 2021 due to weak domestic demand. South Korea's finance minister says that while major employment indices have been positive, difficulties remain for young people and other vulnerable classes. He says the government will extend job training programs for young people and to implement other supportive measures actively. Japan's new leadership has pledged to draft another big spending package, one that will exceed the size of last year's stimulus. Prime Minister Ishiba has said that the package will be funded by a supplementary budget that exceeds last year's $87 billion. Such big spending would make Japan the odd man out among advanced nations that have mostly phased out crisis mode stimulus. And this comes at a time when the Bank of Japan is raising interest rates from near zero levels, adding to the cost of funding public debt. Once considered a fiscal and monetary hawk, Mr. Ishiba had toned down his earlier calls for Japan to wean off radical stimulus. Now, since taking office this month, he stressed that his focus is to get the economy to shake off the deflation of the last 3 decades. Some believe the upcoming snap election is putting pressure on Mr. Ishiba to appease voters with promises of big spending. Japan's tourism boom is seeing no signs of easing. Data released today show that spending by foreign visitors reached $39 billion in the first 9 months of this year, surpassing the previous full-year record high of $35.5 billion. Now, Japan welcomed some 2.87 million visitors in September. That's a record for the month. In fact, arrivals have set new monthly records since February, including 3.29 million back in July, and that was an all-time high for any month. The surge was attributed to the significantly weaker yen, and the boom has also led to fears of over-tourism. Now, through to September, nearly 27 million tourists have arrived in Japan, on pace to break the record of 31.9 million set in 2019 before the pandemic shut global borders. And that is the latest in business. Azali.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we're going to go for another break, but coming up in East Asia tonight, Hong Kong leader John Lee pledges reforms and places livelihood issues among key priorities in his third policy address. And we'll be speaking with John Burns, an emeritus professor from the University of Hong Kong, for more insights. And later, US, South Korea and Japan unveil a multinational team to monitor sanctions enforcement against North Korea. Chinese leader Xi Jinping reaches out to the US, saying his country is willing to be a partner and friend to benefit not just the two nations, but the entire world. And partnerships in focus at the Shanghai Cooperation Summit in Islamabad, with China saying it is ready to boost ties with Russia, and Pakistan calling for an expansion of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. And Hong Kong's chief executive pledges reforms to spark economic growth. John Lee pivoting away from national security in his annual policy address. And for more on the policy speech, we are joined now by John Burns. He's an emeritus and honorary professor of the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the University of Hong Kong. Well, thanks, Professor, for joining us this evening. First up, I thought we'd just get an overview, your general assessment about this shift, basically, from a greater focus on security to that of jolting the economy, which is what Hong Kong needs. Do you think John Lee hit the mark?
Yes, I do. We have to remember, what is it that the people want? So when asked what they wanted to see in the policy address, they said that the policy address needed to focus on the economy, needed to focus on livelihood issues, and stay away from national security. That doesn't mean national security isn't mentioned right at the top, because national security is something that this government also has to focus on. So I think overall, yes, it did address these concerns.
Right. And when it comes to mortgage easing, by raising the loan to value ratio as well as the debt servicing ratio, I thought I'd get your insights into how do you think this is going to impact the housing market? I mean, is it going to help more people get onto the property ladder, or could it worsen existing issues such as affordability?
It will have both of those impacts, it seems to me. It will definitely make it easier for people to get mortgages, but it may also result in increased prices, and this is something that Hong Kong has to pay attention to. Actually, when it comes to housing, there are other issues besides the easing the mortgage restrictions that are very important here. One of these is focusing new regulations on the size of subdivided flats. This is one of the horror stories of Hong Kong. We have to realize that 220,000 people live in subdivided flats. And for the first time, the government is going to set minimum standards, such as they have to have a toilet and a window and 86,000 square feet. So this will have an impact on almost 250,000 people, 34,000 of whom are children. I think this is very significant. Also, the government, in terms of housing, wants to improve the ability, make it easier for those in public rental housing to buy their own home through a subsidized homeownership scheme flat. So housing is a big thing, and this policy address has some measures that I think will work well for Hong Kong. It won't solve all the problems, but it will work well.
Yeah, and it's certainly a big deal for the local population living in those, shoebox rooms and houses, which I want to move on to the other end of the property spectrum, though, where talking about investment incentives, because Mr. Li mentioned about he wants to allow investments in residential properties worth over 50 million Hong Kong dollars to attract foreign investments, for instance. And what do you make of that?
I think that this will be attractive to people on the mainland who are looking to come to Hong Kong, have a foothold in Hong Kong, and maybe go further overseas from there. Whether it's going to be attractive to people other than the mainland, I'm less sure. I mean, the United States and Europe have been reluctant to invest in anything in Hong Kong recently, and so I think it's mainly targeted at mainland buyers or investors.
What about attracting foreign talent via the expanded Top Talent Pass scheme, drawing high-income talent back to Hong Kong, for instance? Your thoughts on that? Is that enough? And how is that going to implicate the local workers?
So I think this is aimed mainly at bringing talent in from the mainland. And so far, we've been told that it's been quite successful because it's been in operation for some time now. What kind of talent are we talking about? Because when we look at the central government's priorities for Hong Kong and the policy address, we see that innovation and technology are big items. And so we're looking at talented people who can help with this. And I think Hong Kong has a shortage in this area, a very clear shortage. And so this is welcome.
Yeah, we heard earlier from the Vox Pops that we got from Hong Kong that somebody was saying, if mainland China's economy doesn't improve, it means it's going to be tough for Hong Kong to see improvement as well. And do you think then there is a need for Hong Kong to further diversify its economy that they have so often relied much on the funds from mainland?
It is necessary to diversify. It depends what you mean by diversify. We have focused for so long on property and finance, and we have to diversify from that. But relying on talent from the mainland, I think that would help us to diversify in innovation and technology. If you look at the GBA, the Greater Bay Area as a whole, and Shenzhen and Hong Kong, you can see that innovation and tech, from the perspective of innovation and technology, Hong Kong and the GBA do relatively well. Hong Kong, however, is behind the game. And so this would be an effort to import talent and help, it seems to me.
All right, Professor, I've got time for just one more question. I want to talk about the lowering of the alcohol duty, where they want to slash the duty on these high-end liquor imports from 100% down to 10%. What exactly is the objective of that? Is it to attract more, perhaps, high-end tourism or trade?
Yes, I think it is to help the trade. That's what I've been told. Doctors are not too happy with this because they say it could impact our health. But actually, most alcohol, which isn't the high-end alcohol, won't be affected by this. So it will be the very expensive bottles of wine and whiskey and things like that, which should help the trade and should help attract some tourists.
All right, good to know. Thanks very much for your insights. John Burns, Emeritus and Honorary Professor at the University of Hong Kong. China President Xi Jinping says that his country is willing to be a partner and friend to the U.S. According to state media, Mr. Xi stresses that a successful partnership presents an opportunity for both countries to be enablers for each other's development rather than an obstacle. This follows earlier remarks in which he emphasized that ties with Washington are among the most important bilateral relations in the world. Mr. Xi also highlighted Beijing's commitment to mutual respect and peaceful coexistence with Washington. The U.S. and China have been at odds over national security concerns amid heightened concerns over Beijing's actions in the South China Sea. Trade relations have also soured in the past year, with Washington ramping up restrictions on Chinese electric vehicles and advanced semiconductors. And the Taiwan issue, another major point of contention between the two rival superpowers. Beijing says there is only one China, stressing that the island belongs to the mainland. Well, the State Council's Taiwan Affairs Office, in a press conference this morning, says that it will not promise to renounce the use of force over Taiwan.
我们愿以最大诚意、尽最大努力争取和平统一的前景，但绝不承诺放弃使用武力。这针对的是外部势力干涉和极少数台独分裂分子及其分裂活动，绝非针对广大台湾同胞。
Beijing added that it legitimately represents Taiwan, refuting again a speech by the island's President William Lai last week, who denied this. China has long claimed the island as a renegade province and vowed to reunite with it. Well, the press conference this morning follows a flare-up of tensions earlier this week when China launched air and sea drills around Taiwan. A record 125 Chinese planes participated in the drills, which prompted Taiwan to deploy its own forces. The day-long exercise on Monday was designed to warn separatist forces on the island. And the U.S. urged restraint, calling the drills unnecessary. Washington said it opposed any unilateral change to the status quo for Taiwan and called on both sides to engage in dialogue. The United States, South Korea and Japan have announced the launch of a new multinational team that will monitor the enforcement of sanctions against North Korea. Their decision is in response to a move by Russia and China that thwarted monitoring activities at the United Nations. The mechanism, called the Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Team, will continue the UN panel's work, including issuing regular reports on sanctions enforcement. The team will also include representatives from Britain, France, Germany, and 5 other countries.
The goal of the new mechanism is to assist the full implementation of UN sanctions on the DPRK by publishing information based on rigorous inquiry into sanctions violations and evasions attempts.
Back in March, Russia rejected the annual renewal of a UN panel that had been overseeing sanctions aimed at curbing North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. The U.S. believes Moscow's move was likely due to a report that accused Russia of illegally buying military equipment from North Korea for its war in Ukraine.
The potential for this to be a major effort in tracking and holding to account steps that North Korea is taking across a range of provocative actions is real, and we look forward to it taking shape in the months and years ahead.
North Korean state media claims that around 1.4 million young people have signed up or rejoined the army this week. State media KCNA said the numbers included students and youth league officials. The report also said that those enlisting were determined to fight in a war of destroying the enemy. The claims come at a time when tensions in the Korean peninsula are running high. Last year, North Korean media made a similar claim of its citizens volunteering to join the army, or rather the military, to fight against the U.S. Well, this latest development comes on top of North Korea blowing up sections of inter-Korean roads on its side of the heavily fortified border. Japan has warned against what they called escalation on the Korean peninsula following the detonations. The explosions prompted South Korea's military to fire warning shots. South Korea has accused the North of violating the inter-Korean agreement and strongly condemned it. Pyongyang has accused Seoul of sending drones over the North Korean capital. North Korean media said that leader Kim Jong-un directed a plan of immediate military action and expressed a tough stand during a national security meeting. The two Koreas have also clashed over balloons of trash floated since May from North Korea. Pyongyang has said that the launches are a response to balloons sent by activists in the south. Time now for another break. But coming up on East Asia tonight, we will have CNA's Melissa Goh joining us to tell us why Chinese families are increasingly making the move to Malaysia. Malaysia has emerged as a preferred destination for mainland Chinese parents to send their children for further studies. Well, as CNA's Melissa Goh reports, many are also taking up residence in the country for the sake of their children's education.
It's the first day of the new academic year at the leading university in Malaysia, and the mood is festive. Wang Lingyue and Shi Yu were among thousands of mainland Chinese students who had just arrived at the campus. Now, of the new intake of international students at Malaysian universities this year, almost half come from mainland China, pursuing postgrad degrees. They said they are drawn by the lower cost of living in Malaysia. Now, this despite the recent strengthening of the ringgit.
喜欢这个专业，然后选择了这个学校，不是说费用只是其中一部分的考虑因素而已。对。
According to the Education Ministry, more than 44,000 mainland Chinese students enrolled in universities across Malaysia last year, a number that has quadrupled since 2020 and is expected to continue rising despite the recent increase in tuition fees.
The tuition fee in University of Malaya also raised, and for about 10 to 20%. But compared to other countries like the UK, USA, or Australia, the cost of living in Malaysia, also the cost of the education in Malaysia is especially low.
Michael Yang is pursuing a master's degree in media studies here in Kuala Lumpur. Competition is steep back home, he says, and having a postgraduate degree is absolutely crucial now.
Almost every student in China, they have a bachelor degree. So if they want to get a higher salary in the future, the master's degree is necessary.
Parents often spare no expense when it comes to their children's education and the lessons that extend beyond the classroom.
毕竟接触的人比较多一些，包括我们的各个民族的文化元素接触的要多一些，开阔自己的视野。
那主要的目的就是这样子，给他们一个机
会。对，给孩子一个走一走，看一看外面的世界多精彩。
Malaysia is welcoming them with open arms, streamlining its visa processes with the aim to attract 250,000 international students by 2030.
We would like Malaysia to become education hub for international students. So we hope that maybe if this year we can achieve 70,000, maybe next year we should achieve 80 to 90,000 applications from the international students.
Lately, more young Chinese parents have applied for the Malaysia My Second Home program, or MM2H.
My client side, quite a lot of them is interested in education. Yeah, they would like to send their kids to come over for international school, although our program is not the lower side. But because of good relationship with Malaysia, diplomatic-wise, others factor like education, good environment for education, for language, for culture. So this makes that Malaysia My Second program attractive.
Of the 56,000 MM2H pass holders, nearly half are mainland Chinese, and Malaysia aims to attract at least 10,000 new applicants after it lowered the minimum house purchase price from $230,000 to $140,000 in some states.
And for more, we have Melissa Goh joining us live from Kuala Lumpur. So, Mel, we are seeing such a big number of Chinese students. They are flocking to Malaysia. What are some of the main factors driving these numbers, perhaps aside from the Musang Wang durians?
Cost, of course, is one good reason for them to look at Malaysia. Even though international students, their tuition fees are a lot higher than locals in public universities, they pay twice as much easily, but it's still a lot cheaper compared to fees in the US, UK, or Australia, they said. Also, they like it here. The Musang King, you mentioned the food, the weather, the culture, the language. I mean, about 23% of Malaysian population are ethnic Chinese. And also, the atmosphere, they said here at the universities is a lot more relaxed, they said. Unlike back home, the competition is so steep and the entrance exams are so difficult in order to qualify for postgrad programs. And international schools in China is just so super expensive, they said. So Malaysia is a good choice, they said, for them to come here to get their master's degree. Now, they said Malaysia is not that far away. There are many connecting flights between KL and Beijing and all the major cities. So it's no surprise at all that the number of mainland Chinese students is going to surge in Malaysia, not just in Kuala Lumpur, but across the country in major cities, in Penang and Johor as well.
So I'm curious to know, Mel, I mean, is Malaysia ready for this surge? I mean, in terms of their infrastructure, I mean, can it keep up with this, with the demand?
You know, that's the thing, you know, with the exponential increase in mainland Chinese students that we are seeing in the past years pursuing their tertiary education in Malaysia, the leading universities are experiencing some difficulties. Now, I spoke with the professors over there, and they would rather remain anonymous. They said it's getting harder and harder to cope with the number kept increasing. A lot of these mainland Chinese students, they said, who are pursuing the master's degree and the postgrad program, many can't converse in English, and they have problems following the course, and they use AI tools in everything to help them translate. So it's very hard. And if the number of lecturers remain the same, it's going to be difficult. I spoke with the Higher Education Ministry, the one-stop center for foreign students. They said that that's a happy problem. They will find a way to cope because there's just hundreds of private institutions that are just willing to take them in now. Now, on average, each international student, they said, spends about 10 to 11,000 US dollars a year. So it's clear that Malaysia wants the business in line with its ambition to become an education hub and to attract 250,000 international students by year 2030. And that's a target. And mainland Chinese students will dominate, half of them at least.
Right, and it seems like it's not just the students who are coming to Malaysia. I mean, they're lugging their parents in tow. You touched in your story on the whole MM2H, which is short for Malaysia My Second Home program, and parents are looking into it. And this is an attractive option for them, isn't it? And why is it so?
Yeah, to some of them it is. Now, in December last year, Malaysia announced a revised guideline for foreigners who want to bring their families, their children here and make Malaysia their second home. It's a lot more structured guidelines now based on 3 tiers, each with its own specific financial requirements. So for many mainland Chinese parents whom I spoke with, they want their children to live and study here. So if they're willing to place a fixed deposit of $150,000 and buy a property here that's priced about $140,000, which is a lot cheaper than houses in Shenzhen, in Shanghai, in Beijing, they can have multiple entry visas for themselves, for their children, also for their parents, their in-laws. So far, the program has been very successful among the mainland Chinese. They already account for almost half of the existing MM2H pass holders in the country. Now, and with this new guideline, more are expected to apply because the government has lowered the property price in some states and done away with offshore income. They don't have to prove that they have an income. So long the applicants are 25 years and above, they can apply. Now, already agents and consultants of MM2H are telling me they receive a lot of inquiries and a lot more applications are coming in from China, and many applicants, they said, are getting younger and younger, in their late 30s, in their early 40s, no longer the retirees, no longer the silver hair category. They are professionals who want a different future for themselves and for their children.
This different future you're talking about, what then is their plan after graduating? Do they plan to stay in Malaysia and work, or maybe go back to China or around the region?
Well, getting a job is not that easy, I must say. And, you know, it's still a work in progress, the application. It's unclear how many will actually go through. But what the consultants are saying that, you know, for mainland Chinese applicants, first of all, they face problems transferring money from China because there are restrictions. Each person can only transfer up to $50,000 per year. And also, applicants, they also encounter problems if they tell the Chinese government that they're buying properties overseas. Now, as you know, amid a slow economy in China, I know bringing money out is frowned upon. It's difficult to bring money out, although many of these mainland Chinese families, they want their children to work abroad. They want their children to have different experience. And a lot of the Chinese students I spoke with, they have big dreams. They want a different future for themselves. And getting a job is not easy. Even going back home to China, they said they face a bleak future because competition is just so stiff back home.
That's right, and joblessness is also a high in some of the big cities in China. Well, really appreciate your story. That's a great story. Thanks so very much for speaking with us today. Melissa Goh, joining us live from Kuala Lumpur.
My pleasure.
And on that note, it's time to wrap up East Asia Tonight this Wednesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And if you want to look for more news, you can always look us up on Facebook, on YouTube, and on X. Well, thanks for your company this Wednesday.